Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a frontline update for the 1st of February 2023. We'll go straight to it to our northeastern sector, Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna. It looks like this on my map. Having said that, there was news last night in Belgorod that there was quite a bit of air activity. So I think the Ukrainians were having a little pop at Belgorod over the Russian border. Some videos coming out of a lot of air defense in operation there. We can see that really there's not been a huge amount of movement on this axis. Let's have a little look at what Defamon says. Well, in fact, let's go to the Kenneth roundup because it kind of gives you an oversight. So this is Kenneth Gregg is either Finnish or Swedish, I think, working in Ukraine. He's been on the front lines in various places. I think he's just been back to visit in Bakhmut. Ideal, especially with Bakhmut and Kreminna area. On the two front sections, the Russians have reinforced with several divisions. I dare say that they have started their offensive, aiming to have taken the whole of Luhansk and Donbass before February the 24th. This, by the way, fits in with what the ISW has said, which is that Ukrainian officials continue to support ISW's assessment that an imminent Russian offensive in the coming months is the most likely course of action, and further suggested that Ukrainian forces plan to launch a larger counteroffensive. Russians are focused on occupying a larger area of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. Budanov, so Alexei Budanov, the Defense Council Secretary, said there are currently 326,000 Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine and 150,000 mobilized personnel still on the training grounds. And then you've also got conscripts that can be thrown in, the annual conscripts. Budanov has recently stated that Ukrainian forces intend to launch a major counteroffensive throughout Ukraine in the spring of 2023 from Crimea to Donbass. I think that's probably overstating it. So anyway, there is this big offensive building. Kenneth Gregg says, it's likely to be before the 24th of February with the anniversary, an anniversary present to the master Russian himself. Now this will not succeed, but let's take it step by step. Bakhmut will probably be abandoned within 2 weeks. Unfortunately, I visited the area today, talked to people from the International Legion and with people from the aid organizations. The facts about the evacuation of Chasiv Yar and the troop movements speak for this. The seizure of the Bakhmut neighborhood, the crossing of the first canal northeast of the town, and the attempt to break the maintenance road northeast of Stupochny, thus threatening Chasiv Yar, speaks for itself. Our new line of defense will probably be Konstantinivka, Mykolivka, Chasiv Yar, Markova, Vasyukivka, Berezhny, Siversk. So I'll explain that all to you later. The Russians have already understood this and now attack in direction from Soledar towards Berezhny. The intensified evacuation of the civilians from Bakhmut demonstrates a Severodonetsk case-type combat model, i.e. a tactic to take out as many of the enemy as possible, so bleeding the Russians as much as possible. Chasiv Yar has been under artillery and helicopter attacks today. The mayor has called for immediate evacuation. The town is ideal for us to defend because it is located high up on a hill. At Kreminna, so moving on up to Kreminna, the Russians have deployed large reinforcements here too. They have launched a major counterattack that is currently having partial success. If we can't take Kreminna, Bilhorivka will be the new Bakhmut. Since the enemy have taken Soledar and the surrounding area, this has given Bilhorivka great problems. I would not be surprised if we retreat to the Dronivka-Siversk-Peretsnya line to build up an attack force with the new Western weapons. As for Vuhledar, it's getting better. As the new artillery reinforcements have done their job. This now looks like a gloomy report, but actually it isn't. With this tactic, the Russians are being thinned out considerably, and since their new mobilization has not yet begun, we have time to get the new weapons in, get our offensive strength in order, and the weather has time to turn in our favor. All in all, I maintain that we will end the war by midsummer when we get our F-16s. Air supremacy will be the deciding factor. I think that's rather simplifying things a lot and pretty hopeful, but we shall see. So when we then come to the front lines, the Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna front line here, the Russians are pushing back, particularly further down south. In fact, if we go to the Poulet Volant maps, because they're nice and clear and colourful, the only yellow arrow we see on the entire front line is in the Kuzmivka area. Okay, so this is the only place that the Ukrainians appear to be on something of an offensive, trying to take ground. Everywhere else, it's red lines. Basically, quiet down to Kuzmivka. Defmon says the Ukrainian repulse and attack in the area of Novoselivska. It's been pretty quiet from this area. Novoselivska and Stelmakivka used to be attacked on a daily basis, so it's possible Russian forces have lost offensive potential in this area. And then going down to Kreminna-Seversk, the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area of Yampolivka, Bilhorivka, and Spurna. Shellings are still mentioned close to Kreminna and Dobrova, and I believe the front line is fairly stationary, even if I think the VDV are trying to push back. No reports says on this axis that Cherevati, a spokesman for the Ukraine's forces in the east, said that the Ukrainian offensive towards Kreminna and Svatove has slowed down. Read, it stopped, I would have thought. Near Kuzmivka, the Ukrainians are still moving forward. While near Kreminna, the AFU indeed mostly repels attacks now. So it seems like there's been a momentum shift. The Ukrainians are on the offensive in this area, and the Russians are on an offensive in this area. The Ukrainians are now in a defensive posture. Rebar, pro-Russian source, says in the Kupiansk Svatove direction, there were no significant changes. In the Liman sector, so near Kreminna, Ukrainian recon groups operate near Dobrova, attempting to entrench in no man's land. Russian units use drones to identify targets for artillery. Yep, nothing unusual there. And that's it. So actually not a lot to report. Let's move on further south then. So as we come further down south, there, as I said, repelled attacks around Kreminna, apparently 8 kilometers from Kreminna. So that's further than that has been. So it does suggest that Ukrainians are further back with their engagements there and artillery shelling as well. If the Russians are, I mean, I don't really agree with the ISW here. It says the Russians have shelled. Here we go. So geolocated combat footage posted on January the 30th shows Russian artillery striking a Ukrainian position about 8 kilometers west of Kreminna, indicating that Ukrainian forces, have advanced to within 8 kilometers of the settlement. Well, they were like 2 kilometers previously. So how does that show that they've advanced to 8 kilometers if they were previously closer? So yeah, don't really agree with that assessment from ISW. Anyway, Bilhorivka is important. I'm not quite sure which Bilhorivka that they're talking about when there's this discussion about Bilhorivka being the new Bakhmut. It could be this one, but it could also be this one. This is important. If that goes, then you can see this whole line sort of collapsing back to here. Well, both of them really are important to hold out. So what has happened? Well, there's been repelled attacks pretty much everywhere around here. There has been claims from Russians that they have taken this small village, but there's no visual confirmation of that yet. So this is a small village just to the north of Krasnopolivka, between Vasyukivka and Mykolaivka. Rostelivka under pressure again. So what's worthy of note is that you've got a higher ground coming down here behind Blahadatny. So Blahadatny is actually on the lower ground. So that being lost to the Russians is not a surprise. If you look at the topographic map here, you've got Bakhmut down here coming up. That's Blahadatny, which is on the lower ground. The Russians have taken that. So now if we have a look at where the front line is now looking something like that, okay, and the Ukrainians have built entrenchments all behind here that kind of follows the line of the higher ground. So I've just drawn that in a little bit of a low ground there, but you get the point. So if the Russians attack, they'll have trouble doing a full frontal attack. So there's now claims, reporting from Ukraine just said this, they appear to be trying to do this. So getting round onto the high ground, coming round past the trenches, and then assaulting them from this direction. However, there are certain obstacles around here that might make that difficult for them. But you get the idea that the higher ground behind here is going to be the natural defensive barrier, and that basically the Ukrainians are willing, I guess, to let this lower ground go. However, Krasnohora, although that's in the lower ground, is quite well defended, and they want to keep hold of that because of course the logistics that sits around. So that is here. They have lost little bits of ground around there. The Russians are creeping in on Paraskevivka to the south, And then, of course, to the north, with Blahodetny now taken, that means where Krasnohora could hold out on sort of these fronts, now with Avdivka threatened from the north, as well as the south and southeast, then, Krasnohora is in trouble. And there's a lot of pressure around here, and it is, one assumes, a matter of time. It's kind of looking like a matter of time just for Bakhmut as a whole. As was mentioned previously, Chasiv Yar being hit now more consistently. The mayor has called for evacuation of there. This is on a hill, so if we go back to Chasiv Yar here, we see Bakhmut. And let's look at so that is Chasiv Yar there. So you can see that's on much higher ground and much easier to defend, arguably, than Bakhmut itself, which is here. So yeah, it looks like there will be a new axis that is going to, I don't know, would it be something like, this is what Kenneth Gregg was saying, it's going to look something like this, maybe. Maybe on high ground, maybe slightly in front of that. I don't know if they'll try and use settlements rather than natural barriers for that defensive line, and of course that will need to stretch up to Siversk just up here. So you got Chasiv Yar down there and Siversk up there. One assumes that it, Perezhny, that's what it's saying, whether it'll look something like that, and they let go of Bakhmut. They are starting to evacuate the people from the center now. I mean, that's been taking place for months and months, but like properly, right, it's game over now, guys, type thing. So yeah, that's what it's looking like. Defmon says of the area Bakhmut, Russians are trying to gain control over the T0504 road between Chasiv Yar and Ivanivska, which is used to supply Bakhmut. I believe the road is more or less unusable at this point. The same goes for the M03 around Yahidne, north of Bakhmut, which is kind of what I've been talking about. So it's this idea that and they're not, I don't know why it always deselects that. So these roads here that you can see to the north, there, and to the southwest, Ivanivska, those are pretty much compromised, and you've only got this smaller one going in from that direction. Let's have a look at Poulet-Volon's maps as we come further down south. As you can see, going past Kreminna and whatnot, all those red arrows, and then the red arrows around here. So all the pressure around Bakhmut here and Krasnohora. Well, this is Soledar, Krasnohora, holding out there as a pocket, and then as we come further down south, all those red arrows everywhere, just pressure, pressure, pressure. No reports says of Bakhmut. South, the Russian troops have reached the cemetery, not yet controlled. Attack on Ivanivska has been repelled. East, the Russian troops have moved closer to the art winery. In fact, I believe they've taken the art winery, at least Russian sources are saying that. North, the Russians continue to put pressure on Krasnohora. It appears to be partly under Russian control. I'm looking for confirmation. So that's not great news there. And in the very sort of northern area, Russian troops tried to expand territorial gains north of Soledar. There is a claim that the Wagner PMC, that Saka Ivantseti, has been captured. That's that village I talked about, but I cannot verify the claim anyway yet. It seems premature. Fighting does continue towards Mykolaiivka and Rodzelivka that are very close to there. So yeah, the art winery claim. I mean, here's the claim from Syriac maps that village to the north has been taken. Make of that what you will. And then, no, we don't want to go to Vuhledar here. So this is what they think has happened around Bakhmut city. So 3 areas of gain for the Russians, which I have represented on my map, actually, because I think that's probably correct. So you've seen gains coming down in these northern outskirts here. There's a meat packing plant, which might be that there's lots of fighting about. And then there's the art winery here, which, no report says there's fighting nearby. Many other claims are saying that actually the Russians have taken that. And then finally got some information, although it's from pro-Russian sources, that they've taken parts of the eastern suburbs here. Again, that's Syriac maps giving me that information. Not really come from any other sources. Rebar says Solidar, yeah, Paris, Avdivka, Krasnohora. Clashes continue. Bakhmut, Wagner are attacking near the meat plant in the Zabakhmutovka region. Southeast of Bakhmut, Russian forces have attacked Ukrainian positions near Ivaniska and Stupichka. So yeah, that's all the information there. As far as what the ISW say, they are pretty much saying exactly what I said recently, which is it appears that Wagner have culminated, but they've passed the baton to the regular Russian troops. So the introduction of Russian conventional forces to the Bakhmut front line has offset the culmination of Wagner Group's offensive and retained the initiative for Russian operations around the city. ISW does not forecast the imminent fall of Bakhmut to Russian forces, although the Ukrainian command may choose to withdraw rather than risk unacceptable losses. I think that's probably happening. Russian officials are again overestimating Russian military capabilities to advance in this area in a short period of time. And here, the Russian MOD may be attempting to fully supplant Wagner forces near Bakhmut and frame the traditional Russian military command structure as a sole victor around Bakhmut, assuming Russian forces eventually take the city. That could be fascinating. Russian conventional forces may be replacing expended Wagner PMC forces by relocating them from Bakhmut to the front lines in southern Ukraine. This could be a really clever move by the Russian MOD in terms of selling this to their public, which is get Wagner to do all the heavy lifting here, expend loads of prisoners. You don't have to look after those prisoners anymore. Pay for them in terms of prison care and the judicial system. Throw them in here, get them all killed, win Bakhmut, replace all those expended soldiers with Russian regular military, and say, "Well, look what we've done." And there'll be the Russian regular military that raise a flag in Bakhmut. Like you can see that happening. I don't know if that's definitely going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me. It's fairly canny. And probably good for internal optics in terms of the success of their own military, rather than the only real success being from Wagner. But there you go. That is what is happening. There's obviously advances, well, not obviously, but there are advances around Klishchivka, according to pro-Russian sources, saying they are moving closer to Ivanivska. So that's why I've got the two lines there to show you where they have advanced. Same goes for the eastern and northern areas as well, northeastern areas there. You can see that there are advances in certain areas, and it's not looking great for the Ukrainians. We'll see what happens. Let's go to Poulet Voulon's maps, because actually, as we come further down south here, he's got some detail of as we come down past Ozarianivka, we come to Mayorsk. In fact, Syriac maps is saying, so the other day I said there was a correction of the Syriac maps, and we come just down here to Mayorsk, and that the Ukrainians had this land here, taken a bit of the railway line here, where actually Syriac has now walked that back and said that there is some gains of the Russians around that area here. So they have some of that railway track back. Look, a stretch of railway now in Russian control. They took control of parts of the railway north of Mayor. So I'll probably change that eventually, but it's not exactly the end of the world. As we come past Shumi and New York, it's interesting that the Poulet Volant maps here show that around New York, the Ukrainians, and again, it hasn't got actually a timestamp on that, but it's probably usually has that from the new year, from the 31st of December. It looks like the Russians have actually lost ground around here and just around Shumi as well. So I find that quite interesting, because you don't really hear too much detail coming from New York and Shumi. And then we come down to sort of Avdivka and around there. So let's go and look at Avdivka as we pop down to Avdivka, just further down south. According to Defmon, Avdivka, Pervomaysky, and Vodyanye, the front line does not really move in the area despite Russian claims. Pisky was the last village Russia captured sometime between August and October. All quiet in Avdivka now, says no reports And Rebar, pro-Russian source, says in the Avdivka sector, Russian servicemen continue to move on to Siverny, which they've said over the last sort of 4 days. At the same time, they are fighting in Novelsky. Clashes continue in Marinka. So we're going to come down to Marinka now. So basically, not a lot has happened in Avdivka. We come to Marinka, and again, not a lot of movement there. No report says Russian troops have launched an attack today in Marinka. Fighting broke out in the center against multiple Russian assault groups. No changes for now. It's hard to say exactly how the situation is, but it looks more or less like that, which is, that's that grey zone in the center, a little bit of a spike up there in the north, which is what I have. Uh, Actually, I haven't, but arguably the Russians have this it's got a little spike over there. But basically, it's one big grey area. Poulet Volant, talks about shows where are you, Marinka. Oh, no, I don't think it's that map. Oh no, we might be missing a bit of Marinka. Yeah, sorry, I'm just unable to read a map. Marinka there, so no kind of movement there, but yeah, as I say, Rebar clashes continue in Marinka. Russian artillery is striking the western part of town. Again, remember that over the last week or so, Rebar's been claiming it's all happening in the west. Artillery hitting the west, fighting on the west, and then everyone else saying, no, it looks like the center, and nothing's changed. So yeah, Rebar, there you go. And then it's Vuhledar, where again we are seeing more of the same. I have moved Russian forces forward just to the east of Mikilska, between Mikilska and Volodymyrivka. So there has been some gains around there, at least according to Syriac maps. In addition to the advances around Vuhledar, have expanded the buffer zone north of Volodymyrivka. So around there. So I have adapted the map to represent that. Just to give you a quick reminder, Vuhledar sits on higher ground, Pavlivka and Mikilska on lower ground. The Russians are trying to do several pronged attacks at the moment, whilst also trying to take the mine up there. So there's a kind of push towards the mine, push towards these dachas, these more rural settlements here. And then a push from Pavlivka to fix the forces there. Meanwhile, hammering the whole place with artillery, and it's hilarious that Rebar say Ukrainian formations are indiscriminately shelling residences in these places when the Russians are indiscriminately shelling pretty much everywhere they can get their hands on. So anyway, that's what's going on in the Vuhledar area, and there's been a huge amount of material and troops lost. Russian forces have taken a severe hammering in terms of troops lost. So there are some claims that some of their units are just not at fighting strength, so on and so forth. Defmon says in Vuhledar, the Ukrainians repulse and attack. The rate of attacks is now slowed, but the quality of them has been lower, according to Tatsirigami UA, and I reported on it yesterday. Given the amount of naval infantry Russia have sacrificed for the city, I think it's likely they will keep attacking in this area. Sunk cost fallacy and all that. Taking Vuhledar is important for the Russians to secure ground lines of communications between south and east, creating a buffer for Donetsk. Will also help making it a logistics hub for the offensive in the southeast. No report says no changes. Once again, Russian forces tried to advance northwest of Mikilska, but got covered by Ukrainian artillery. In comparison with a couple of days ago, the amount and intensity of attacks has decreased. Russia today heavily shelled Vuhledar, aiming for high-rise buildings. I mean, yeah, it's complete destruction there. But those buildings are actually fairly robust, and they are holding out to a lot of shelling, including thermobaric weapons. Rebar says the two sides are fighting in southeast Vuhledar. Ukrainian command is sending reinforcements there. And that's all they have to say. So if that's all they have to say, probably not great gains to be had around the Vuhledar area, that's for sure. Then we sort of come on to, well, actually, let's have a look at what ISW has to say. ISW using a couple of Ukrainian military sources. Military officer reported that Russian forces failed to establish control over positions near Vuhledar and that the high casualties and poor weather are constraining Russian combat effectiveness. The Ukrainian military officer reported that Ukrainian forces eliminated the most experienced Russian formations during the first days of renewed Russian assaults near Vuhledar and that the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade of the Pacific Fleet has suffered heavy losses. Ukrainian military officer also reported that Russian forces have accumulated a large number of their own forces in the area and will likely continue the localized offensive to capture Vuhledar. And he claimed, Russian mill bloggers claimed on January the 31st, so the previous stuff is a bit old, that Ukrainian forces have deployed a large number of personnel to the Vuhledar area. So there is ongoing fighting there. It's not looking great for the Russians, but they still have accumulated forces. Ukrainians have also reinforced. I assume it's going to be more of the same. Yeah, there you have it. As for the rest of the front line, going towards Zaporizhia, sort of skirmishes around there, nothing too much to report. After the internet offensive last week, which I think was mainly intended to pull Ukrainian troops away from the Eastern Front, says no reports. Things are calm, skirmishes take place locally, but absolutely no full offensive. Daily artillery barrages and duels continue. And Rebar doesn't say anything much else apart from the enemy. So the Ukrainians tried to carry out a landing near Kulich lake on the Dnieper left bank. Russian forces quickly discovered the group and destroyed them with artillery. And that the Russians are striking concentration in Kherson, Berislav, Slotobalka, and Antonivka, so on and so forth. The usual kind of exchanges of fire and artillery. So Poulet Volant, that's the sort of map you see there. A few red arrows here and there, but really actually not a lot of change in territory. So as we come on to the final sort of bits and pieces from the ISW, and here they make reference to what Rebar was saying, that Ukrainian forces conducted a raid on the left bank. Geolocated imagery shows the two boats on the Dnipro River Delta near the island southwest of Kherson City. Russian sources reported that Ukrainian forces briefly landed near and established positions in a residential area on the riverbank before Russian artillery fire forced Ukrainian forces to leave the east bank. One military blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces were wrecking Russian positions and maybe attempting to fix Russian forces in Kherson Oblast, but do not intend to establish a bridgehead on the east bank of the Dnipro. Intermittent Ukrainian raids against the east bank of the Kherson continued to demonstrate that Russian forces likely lack full control over the eastern shoreline of the Dnipro River, as the ISW has previously reported. So that's quite interesting. It does make you wonder exactly what the plans are for the Ukrainians around here, and with these kind of little harrying attacks, what the end goal is. Is it just probing, trying to find a weakness and then exploiting the weakness? I don't know. Anyway, that's the frontline update for the 1st of February. Hopefully that was useful for you. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your excellent commentary and all the support you give to the channel. Really appreciated. Please check out my article on OnlySky. Here it is. Yes, it is a proxy war, and it's one we must win. So that's an article I wrote the other day about the idea that this is a proxy war. Please check it out if you are so inclined. Also, definitely check out as well the interview I did with Orest Zerb. He had me on his channel. We had a great little interview. Really appreciate him giving me a platform there. So go and check that interview out and see what you think, Orest Zerb, and also subscribe to him if you haven't already. Anyway, in the meantime, thanks so much. Take care. Speak to you soon.